Hey, this is Mortiis, and you're watching Alejandrosis, and I'll be playing at the Bogota Tattoo Music Fest, I believe it's called, on the 18th. So I'll hopefully see you there.
Mortiis ha sido una fuerza vital en la génesis del metal épico vikingo, desde diferentes épocas y con distintas narrativas. Fue bajista original de los pioneros del black metal noruego Emperor, y allí también supo incorporar inquietantes melodías de teclado basadas en el folk escandinavo. Más adelante Mortiis inició una carrera en solitario donde la electrónica ha sido fundamental. Este artista se presenta por primera vez en Colombia este domingo 19 de mayo como parte de la 9ª edición del Tattoo Music Fest, esta celebración del arte en la piel junto al rock y al metal fuerte. Es por eso que hemos contactado con Mortiis para tener una antesala de lo que va a ocurrir allí. La charla la queremos compartir con ustedes en este capítulo de Alejandrosis. Sean bienvenidos. Si lo de ustedes es ir a conciertos, los buenos discos y por supuesto las bandas de rock y metal de este país, quiero invitarlos a que en un segundo se suscriban al canal de Alejandrosis, me brinden un me gusta y si este video creen que lo vale, lo compartan y comenten por favor. Muy bien, el señor Håvard Ellefsen, mejor conocido como Mortiis, es nuestro invitado del día de hoy. Nos atendió desde una ciudad noruega fronteriza con Suecia llamada Fredrikstad. Espero estar pronunciándolo bien. Fue muy agradable hablar con este señor unos minutos. Yo lo recuerdo muy bien con sus apariciones en la televisión y las revistas como Metal Hammer y Kerrang hace aproximadamente 20 años. Y como no, y es que con esa apariencia entre duende y momia, pues era bastante impactante. Sin este traje, pero muy listo a ponérselo este domingo, nos contó lo siguiente acerca de sus expectativas, este regreso a Sudamérica, luego de una primera incursión hacia 2018 cuando estuvo tocando en Chile, Argentina, incluso Bolivia, lo que espera del Tattoo Music Fest, así que escuchémoslo.
I don't know, man. I mean, I try not to expect things because you never know what anything is going to be like. So, I guess the only thing I would expect is I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of tattoos. uh, Beyond that, there's Me and Dark Funeral, and I think Suffocation and some other cool bands. So it's gonna be great, man. Tattoos and metal, and then me, doing my fucking dark dungeon music kind of thing. But from experience, I never expect anything. Whatever happens, happens, and it'll be. I'm sure it's gonna be great, though. It's always great.
Okay. What memories do you have of the South American audiences?
Very enthusiastic. I mean, that was last time at least. You never know what it's going to be in the future. But last time I was in, as you said, I was in Chile, Argentina, also Bolivia and Ecuador. It was pretty much the same in all countries. I felt, very enthusiastic and sort of everybody seemed very excited. Which is cool. You're more intense, I think, than we are over here in Europe, where they seem to be more laid back and sort of arms crossed, like, okay, let's see what you have, Whereas in South America, it seems to be they really do very, very good at showing that you appreciate the musicians, which I think is really cool.
Okay, I have to tell you, many of us here were able to discover your music as the beginning of this millennium through the signal of the French music channel MCM, music
really?
channel. Yeah, which they have a program that is called Total Metal, and I remember to see your video, for example, for Parasite of God. That was the first impression here in Colombia. Many people see that channel. Your image and music were impressive. Were you aware of that global reach?
I mean, I've been doing this since the early 90s, and the way that I started out was networking with people all over the world, including some of the guys out of the Colombian scene back in those days. I mean, I knew one or two bands out of Medellin. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Um, so some of those old metal guys out of there, I used to write with them. So my tapes, like back in the early days, I would send my tapes to all places on the planet. So I started networking globally very early. Um, so I always knew that there was um, a couple of fans here and there, but you never. Sometimes you're surprised at like, oh my God, there were that many. You know, so I guess to a degree I was aware of it, and then some, maybe, but maybe sometimes not the scope, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Okay. For those who don't know Mortiis music, how could you describe the music and what can the people expect about your show in the Tattoo Music Fest?
Well, you mentioned Parasite God. I mean, I'm not that was a specific kind of music I was making in the early 2000s. Um, when I started out in 1992, I was creating really atmospheric, um, very sort of dark and moody music using synthesizers and things like that. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm playing my first album live these days. So I'm going back to the roots. So it's a solo show, and it's going to be quite dark, and it's got a lot of that sort of black metal spirit attached to it. It's not black metal, the music, but the spirit and the vibe and the atmosphere is very similar. So that's what I'm doing now. So it's not going to be the electronic rock sound that you would expect from the Parasite God period. Um, this is probably closer, once again, spiritually to early black metal, what I'm doing now. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing in Colombia this weekend.
Okay, interesting. You have had several areas in your musical evolution. I understand that there are
Right.
era one, two, three, and also a zero era. And as you
Yeah.
said, more recently you are in back to the roots era number one. Could you explain me more about this evolution and what do you decide to back to the early days of your music?
Well, I mean, it started out, I came out of the black metal scene in the very early 90s after Emperor, and I wanted to make something that had the same kind of atmosphere and feeling, but I didn't want to be in a band. I was tired of working with other people. Um, and I wanted to create this kind of atmosphere with something that was not traditional metal. So I had been getting into a lot of old 70s synthesizer music like Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, and things like that. And I thought, wow, those guys are making some really cool fucking stuff. And this sounds a bit like what I want to do. So I started buying some synthesizers and I started creating that kind of music, um, in my spirit, and I did that for the entire 90s. At the end of the 90s, I started getting a little tired of it. I'd done about 5 albums like that, and by that point, I had gotten really interested in sort of crossover music like Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy, and the kind of those kind of what I viewed as really creative musicians, where they would mix different genres together. And I thought that was fucking great. So I started making music like that. And that's when, the Parasite God song came out. And I released albums like Smell of Rain, The Grudge, Perfectly Defect, and The Great Deceiver. Throughout almost the entire 2000s, up until about 2016 or so, I was creating music like that. We were touring all over the world as a band. And we just after about 15 or 16 years, we just got kind of tired of the whole thing, and everybody went their own way, and I was like, well, fuck, what am I going to do now? And I've been kind of thinking about bringing my mask back because I had stopped wearing it many years before, and I thought, well, fuck, man, I mean, I'll go. I had some offers to do some special shit playing. So thinking about bringing my mask back because I had stopped wearing it many years before. And I thought, well, fuck, man. I mean, I had some offers to do some special shit playing some of my early music. And I was like, okay, we'll start there. And I started doing that. And I'm still doing it, man. And I'm still enjoying it. And yeah, here we are. It's a kind of like coming full circle kind of story, I guess.
Okay, I want to ask you about the mask. It's very impressive. You know, it's like some kind of gobbling. You know, what can
Yeah.
you tell me about the history behind this image?
Well, simply put, in the 80s, in the early 80s, when I was a kid, maybe even the late 70s, I was born in 1975, and my earliest memory in life is Gene Simmons, you know, breathing fire and spitting blood. You know, it's Gene Simmons and Elvis Presley are my two first memories in life before my own parents. That's kind of fucked up, but those are my earliest memories. So that leaves an imprint on your entire DNA, I think, you know, about what you think is cool. So of course, when the 80s came in, I got into these American rock and roll bands with the big images, like, you know, early Wasp, the first album, early Twisted Sister, Motley Crue, all those really cool bands. And so I always wanted to be like them when I grew up, you know. And earlier in the 80s, as I got into more extreme kind of music like Venom and Slayer and then, you know, Metallica and all that stuff. I also, of course, discovered really hard fucking death metal and grindcore. So my attitude became quite extreme about music. And then I discovered Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, all that fantasy literature. And I thought that was awesome with all the orcs and the fucking Balrogs, all the monsters. I thought they were fantastic. And of course, that takes us into the black metal period. So all of those things, all those elements had a big influence on me and how I, you know, what I thought was cool visually and musically and all that. So when I went solo right after Emperor, I decided, as I said before, I knew what kind of music I wanted to make. And I started thinking about the image. And at that point, everybody, well, not everybody, but whoever was in the black metal scene, it was still a small scene that back in those days, but everybody were doing corpse paint. So that was nothing new. And I wanted to take it beyond that, you know, like what can we do to expand this idea of the corpse paint? So this is where that whole mix of like the hugeness, the bigness of Kiss, and just the fantasy and the imagination of Tolkien and the orcs and all those things that kicked in, and it just gave me the idea to, well, why don't I create a kind of a mask, you know? So I'll get the nose and the ears. So we just started in the early days. We used what was called blue tack. It's like a clay that you use to put up posters on the walls and things like that. And we just formed the face using that. Because we had no money, we just had to use whatever we could find in the kitchen, pretty much. And we put makeup on top of that. And the really old Mortiis photos from the mid 90s to the early 90s, that's the faces made using that stuff. A few years later, when I had a bit more money, I actually contacted a special effects company who basically works with movies. And I explained to them what I wanted, and we kind of designed the face together, and they made that whole mask for me. And that's the mask I have these days. But in the early days, it was a really sort of a DIY, punky kind of way to do it. You just, whatever I can find, I just fucking put it on and shape it up and put makeup on top. And it turned out pretty cool.
Como lo comentaba anteriormente, Mortiis hizo parte de Emperor, el famoso grupo liderado por el guitarrista y cantante Isaan, que de hecho estuvo en este 2024 tocando aquí en la capital. También hizo lo propio el año pasado con su debut, ambos shows llenos. Y es que Emperor es de esos grupos de cabecera de los sonidos extremos. Pues bien, Mortiis estuvo ahí en la primera etapa y tenía que preguntarle acerca de qué recuerdos tiene y si aún se mantiene en contacto con miembros de Emperor. Por supuesto, la respuesta resultó impagable.
I mean, it's a long time ago that I was in the band, but yeah, we're still in touch now and then. Like, you know, we'll send some messages, and not every day, you know, or anything like that, but like every now and then we'll shoot some messages back and forth on like Instagram or Messenger or even text messages, whatever, you know. So yeah, I'm probably more in touch with Faust than any of the other guys. We kind of text back and forth fairly irregularly. He was I just did last weekend I did 2 shows with Mayhem in Oslo because they had their 40th anniversary thing in Oslo. And so Faust was there, so that was fun. But as far as memories going back, it's like that was back in 1991, 1992, so it's a long, long time ago. We were just young teenagers. And I remember I knew those guys from before Emperor because me and Ishan went to school together. So I've known him since 7th grade, since we're like 13 years old. And I remember him as being this kid, and we weren't in the same class, we were in the same level. And I remember him as this kid with his big curly hair. And I was looking at him like, who the fuck is this guy? But it was great. We got to know each other, really early in life. Then later on, he and Samath had came to me with 2 songs that didn't have any vocals, and they were like, we want to start a black metal band. And this was in 1991. And I wasn't really that interested because even then I'd had 2 bands before that split up. So I was tired of dealing with people. Even back in 91, I was tired of people, But yeah, I joined eventually. And yeah, we rehearsed in this really shitty fucking basement that nobody had cleaned for at least 10 years. It was just it smelled of that, that old beer smell, beer and cigarettes. Yes. And it was a basement. There was no ventilation. So you just went down there and it was like you had to fight your way through the smell, just to fucking get down there. So, but that's where we made the demo, we recorded a demo down there in that basement. And yeah, there were good times, I guess, innocent times, and until everything went to hell. And people started dying and churches were burning, and that's when it got all fucking crazy for a while. But they were good times. I think some really good songs were made back in those days,
Muy bien, ahí estaban las palabras de Mortiis en la antesala de lo que va a ser su debut en nuestro país como parte de la 9ª edición del Tattoo Music Fest, evento que se realiza en Corferias este fin de semana, que tendrá obviamente muchos tatuajes, música en vivo desde el mediodía en sus 2 jornadas. Además de eso, sé que van a haber pruebas de skate, grafitis y bueno, todo el ambiente que se respira en un evento de este calibre. Entiendo que aún hay boletería disponible, así que si quieren un plan entretenido en la capital, pues ahí lo tienen. Mi nombre es Alejandro Bonilla, soy periodista musical. No quiero desaprovechar la oportunidad de invitarlos a que me sigan en mis distintas redes sociales. Estoy en Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Twitter, TikTok, con muchas más reseñas discográficas, noticias de toda esta música que tanto amamos. Muy pronto nos volvemos a encontrar aquí en este canal donde el rock and roll vive. Hasta pronto.